The HOA president called the cops on me for illegally camping at my own lake. But what she didn't know was that her entire neighborhood had been trespassing on my property for 15 years. 6 a.m. Saturday morning, I'm standing in boxer shorts holding my property deed while two deputies approach my grandfather's tent. The smell of campfire coffee mixed with lake mist, gravel crunching under boots, and Patricia Whitmore's shrill voice behind them. That's him, officers. Illegal camping, disturbing our peaceful community. Patty's tapping her red nails against her iPad like she's conducting justice itself. Deputies were apologetic but had to respond. So there I was, packing up while HOA residents watched from their decks like a circus act. But here's what Patty didn't know. I'd just spent 3 days at the county courthouse. What I discovered in those basement records was about to flip their perfect lakeside community upside down. What would you do if your HOA secretly used your land without permission? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I want to see how many dealt with power-hungry board members. Let me back up and tell you how this whole mess started. My name's Mike, and I inherited 47 acres of pristine lake property from my grandfather, a WRI veteran who bought this land in 1952 with his GI Bill benefits. We're talking crystal clear, spring-fed water, 1.2 miles of shoreline, and some of the best bass fishing in the county. Growing up, our family had this sacred tradition. Every summer, we'd spend a week camping at Grandpa's lake. He taught me to fish from his hand-built stone dock, showed me which trees held the old 1920s survey markers, and told stories around that ancient fire pit he'd constructed, rock by rock. After my divorce last year, and losing my corporate job 3 months later, these camping trips became my lifeline. The smell of wood smoke, the sound of loons calling across the water at dawn, the feel of morning dew on my bare feet. This place kept me sane when everything else fell apart. The property sits next to Lakeside Estates, a fancy HOA development built in 2008. $47 million homes with perfectly manicured lawns and homeowners who measure their grass height with actual rulers. I'd always gotten along fine with the neighbors. We'd wave, maybe chat about the weather. Then Patricia Whitmore got elected HOA president. Patty's 52, drives a white BMW X5 and works in real estate. Her claim to fame? Finding residents for unapproved Christmas lights and taking photos of violations with her iPad while wearing designer yoga pants. The woman once issued a written warning because someone's mailbox was 3 degrees off vertical alignment. I should have seen trouble coming when she started walking the property line with that measuring tape. Friday evening, I'd arrived for my usual 3-day camping trip, set up Grandpa's canvas wall tent in the exact same spot we'd used for decades, right next to his stone fire pit, maybe 50 yards from the water. I'd done this hundreds of times, never had a single complaint. But Saturday morning at 6 a.m. sharp, here comes Patty with 2 sheriff's deputies in tow. "This is a residential area with camping restrictions," she announced, like she was reading from some official proclamation. "You need to remove this immediately." I showed them my property deed. Clear as day. Michael Stevens, inheritor of the estate of Robert Stevens, 47 acres, including all water rights and easements. The deputies were clearly uncomfortable. Deputy Martinez actually apologized. "Sir, we have to respond to complaints, but this appears to be a civil matter between neighbors." But Patty wasn't backing down. "He's disturbing the peace and affecting our property values. This isn't some campground." So there I was, pulling down my grandfather's tent while a dozen HOA residents stood on their back decks with their morning coffee, watching the show. The humiliation burned worse than the bacon grease I'd spilled on my hand earlier. As I loaded my truck, Patty delivered her parting shot. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before causing problems for our community." That's when I decided to find out exactly what our community meant. Monday morning, I'm sitting in my woodworking shop, still fuming over the weekend's humiliation. That's when I get a certified letter from the county code enforcement office. Patty had filed an official complaint claiming I was operating an unpermitted campground and disturbing residential peace. The letter threatened daily fines of $500 until violations were corrected. $500 daily for camping on my own land. That afternoon, I drove straight to the county courthouse, one of those imposing brick buildings that smells like floor wax and decades of bureaucracy. The basement records room felt like a tomb, all concrete walls and flickering fluorescent lights. But the county clerk, an elderly woman named Dolores, lit up when I mentioned my grandfather's name. "Oh, honey, Robert Stevens. Your grandpa helped survey half this county back in the day. Meticulous as a Swiss watch, that man." She pulled out the original 1919 property survey, brittle yellow paper that crackled when we unfolded it. The musty smell of old documents filled my nostrils as we spread it across the metal table. "Here's something interesting," Dolores said, pointing to a faded red line. "Your property boundary extends much further east than I thought." We overlaid the historical survey with current county maps. What I saw made my hands shake. The HOA's private beach, their fancy gazebo, and their boat launch, all of it was built on my land, 2.3 acres of prime waterfront property that legally belonged to me. "Looks like when they subdivided for that development in 2007, somebody made a big mistake," Dolores whispered. "Or maybe they just hoped nobody would notice." Here's a crucial legal nugget everyone should know. Adverse possession laws mean if someone uses your land openly for a specific period, usually 7 to 20 years depending on your state, they might actually gain legal ownership. Takeaway: always monitor your property boundaries, even if you trust your neighbors. I spent the next 3 hours photocopying every document, my heart pounding harder with each page. The original 1919 survey clearly showed my grandfather's property line running right through what the HOA now called their exclusive lakefront amenities. They'd been trespassing for 15 years. But here's the mini twist that changed everything. Dolores mentioned that adverse possession only works if the land use is open and notorious, but also if the true owner doesn't object. Since my family had been regularly using the property for camping, and I had photos and receipts going back decades, their adverse possession claim would be nearly impossible to prove. Plus, Dolores added with a sly smile, your grandpa was smart enough to file a new survey in 1987 that specifically noted the eastern boundary markers. That resets any adverse possession clock. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I'd discovered buried treasure. The taste of revenge was sweeter than my morning coffee. That evening, I called a surveyor friend of my grandfather's, Harold Jenkins, who'd recently moved into, you guessed it, Lakeside Estates. After explaining the situation, Harold agreed to meet me at the property line the next morning. "Mike," he said, his voice serious over the phone, "if what you're saying is true, this affects a lot more than just your camping rights." The crunching sound of gravel under my truck tires as I drove home that night had a different rhythm. It sounded like justice rolling forward. 2 days later, another certified letter arrived, this time from Whitmore & Associates Legal Services. Patty had hired her own HOA attorney to send me a cease and desist letter that was basically legal intimidation wrapped in fancy letterhead. The letter demanded I stop harassing residents with frivolous property claims and threatened to sue me for intentional interference with quiet enjoyment of property. The smell of expensive paper and legal jargon made my stomach turn. But the real kicker? Patty had called an emergency HOA meeting for that Thursday evening. Topic: dealing with problem neighbors. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. The community clubhouse was packed, 47 residents crammed into a space meant for 30. The air reeked of burned coffee and stale donuts. Patty stood at the front with a PowerPoint presentation titled Protecting Our Investment, complete with photos of my messy campsite and what she called my inappropriate camping activities. "This individual," she said, clicking to a photo of my tent, "is attempting to exploit a technicality to steal our community amenities that we've invested hundreds of thousands of dollars to maintain." The nervous murmuring from the crowd told me not everyone was buying her story. "He wants to charge us rent for our own beach," Patty continued. "I propose a special assessment of $8,000 per household to fund our legal defense against this property grabber." That's when I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. "I'm not trying to grab anyone's property. You're sitting on mine." The thick packet of courthouse documents hit the table with a satisfying thud. I'd made copies for everyone. "This is the original 1919 survey of my grandfather's property, overlaid with your current development map, your private beach, your gazebo, your boat launch. They're all built on land that legally belongs to me." I watched 47 faces go from annoyed to confused to genuinely concerned as they studied the documents. The rustle of paper being passed hand to hand sounded like leaves in a windstorm. Then Harold Jenkins stood up from the third row. "I need to see those documents," he said quietly. "Harold's a retired surveyor. When he talks about property lines, people listen. He studied my paperwork for what felt like an eternity, while the room held its breath." "These documents appear to be legitimate," Harold finally announced. "If accurate, this represents a significant boundary discrepancy that should have been identified during the original development survey. Here's another crucial knowledge nugget. Title insurance claims if your property boundaries are disputed, your title insurance should cover legal defense costs up to your policy limits. Takeaway: always purchase owner's title insurance when buying property. It protects against hidden boundary disputes like this. The mini twist came when Harold offered something unexpected. "I'd be willing to verify these boundaries using modern GPS equipment at no charge. This affects all of us, and we deserve to know the truth." You could hear a pin drop. Patty's face had gone from righteous indignation to panic-stricken pale. "This is all fabricated nonsense," she sputtered. "Harold, you can't seriously be considering—" "I'm considering the facts," Harold interrupted, "and these facts suggest we may have a serious problem." As the meeting dissolved into heated side conversations, 3 residents quietly approached me. Linda Martinez whispered, "I've had my own boundary disputes with Patty. She's not exactly trustworthy." Bob Martinez added, "We never got proper surveys when we bought our lots." The 3rd resident, an elderly man named Jim Thompson, shook my hand firmly. "Your grandfather was a good man. I knew him from the VFW. If he said those markers were accurate, they were accurate." Walking to my truck that night, I realized the community was splitting right down the middle, Team Patty versus Team Truth, and for the first time since this whole mess started, I wasn't fighting alone. The sound of car doors slamming echoed across the parking lot as neighbors chose sides and drove home in stony silence. Patty's response to losing control of that meeting was swift and vicious. Within a week, she'd convinced the city council to investigate me for zoning violations, reported me to the IRS for unreported rental income from camping activities, and somehow organized an informal boycott of my custom woodworking business. 3 of my regular clients suddenly canceled orders with flimsy excuses. Word was spreading that I was mentally unstable following my divorce and harassing innocent homeowners. The whisper campaign was working. But the real sucker punch came when a city inspector showed up during my next camping trip. I'm sitting by the fire pit, enjoying my morning coffee, when this guy in a clipboard and hard hat combo approaches like he's about to discover environmental violations. "Sir, you're operating a commercial campground without proper permits. That's a $500 daily fine until violations are corrected." I could smell Patty's influence all over this. The inspector had clearly been coached on exactly what to look for and what violations to cite. That Saturday morning, Harold Jenkins arrived with something that looked like a science fiction movie prop, professional GPS surveying equipment worth more than my truck. He'd brought 2 other HOA residents, Linda and Bob Martinez, who'd apparently grown tired of Patty's authoritarian leadership style. "Time to settle this scientifically," Harold announced, unpacking gear that beeped and chirped like R2-D2 having a conversation with a smoke detector. We spent 4 hours methodically locating every original survey marker. Harold's GPS unit locked onto satellites with sharp electronic beeps while we tramped through brush, following property lines that hadn't been verified in decades. The smell of fresh-cut grass from nearby HOA landscaping mixed with the earthy scent of disturbed soil where we dug around old boundary markers. What we found was worse than I'd originally thought. "Mike," Harold said, studying his GPS readings, "you don't just own their beach and gazebo. According to these coordinates, you own 2.7 acres of what they consider prime HOA common area." But here's the mini twist that changed everything. Buried in my grandfather's original 1919 deed was something called a perpetual easement for lake access. This legal term meant my family had the permanent right to cross any property necessary to reach our lake, even if that property was later sold or developed. Here's a knowledge nugget that could save you thousands. Prescriptive easements. Even if you don't own land, you might own the legal right to cross it if you've done so openly and continuously for many years without permission. Takeaway: research all easements on your property deed. They can provide unexpected legal advantages in disputes. Linda Martinez had been taking notes throughout our survey expedition. "This means Patty knew about the boundary problems from the beginning," she said quietly. "Remember that board meeting in 2019 when she mentioned property line concerns, but said they'd been resolved?" Bob nodded grimly. "She said getting a new survey would be unnecessarily expensive and that we should trust the original developer's work." Harold finished his measurements and gave me a professional surveyor's report that would hold up in any court. The GPS coordinates matched the 1919 markers within 18 inches. Incredible accuracy for century-old surveying work. "Your grandfather knew what he was doing," Harold said with respect. "These boundaries are rock-solid legal." As we packed up the equipment, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Drop this or you'll regret it." The threatening message came from a burner phone, but I had a pretty good idea who sent it. That evening, Linda called with inside intelligence from the latest HOA board meeting. "Patty's panicking," she whispered. She admitted to the board that she's known about the boundary issues since 2019, but decided it would be cheaper to fight than relocate amenities. The recorded board meeting minutes she'd secretly photographed would become crucial evidence later. Walking back to my truck that night, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounded different, more confident, more determined. I wasn't just fighting for my camping rights anymore. I was fighting for honest governance and community integrity. The stakes had officially escalated beyond property lines. This was now about justice. 3 days after Harold's survey, Linda Martinez called me with information that changed everything. Her voice was shaking as she whispered into the phone from her car in a grocery store parking lot. "Mike, you need to know what happened at last night's emergency board meeting. Patty didn't just know about the property lines. She's been covering up something much bigger." Linda had been secretly recording HOA meetings since her own dispute with Patty 6 months earlier. What she'd captured was explosive. Patty admitted to the board that the HOA borrowed $340,000 against the disputed waterfront property to fund the clubhouse renovation. She used your land as collateral for their loan without telling anyone it wasn't actually HOA property. My coffee mug hit the kitchen counter harder than intended. $340,000, borrowed against land they didn't own. "There's more," Linda continued. "Bob found the original development documents. Patty's brother-in-law was the developer who built Lakeside Estates. The family knew about the boundary discrepancies from day one, but decided to hide the information rather than lose profitable waterfront lot. The pieces clicked together like a jigsaw puzzle from hell. This wasn't just a property dispute. It was organized fraud involving the developer, HOA board, and potentially city officials who approved the development." Bob Martinez had photographed the smoking gun. Board meeting minutes from March 2019. Patty's own words, recorded in official HOA documents. Property line discrepancy identified during legal consultation. Board recommendation: cheaper to fight than relocate amenities. Motion to suppress survey results and manage situation quietly. Vote: 4-1 approved. They'd known for 6 years and voted to cover it up. But here's the revelation that made my hands shake. Harold's wife, a retired accountant, had volunteered to audit the HOA's financial records after hearing about the property dispute. What she found was devastating. "Patty's been embezzling from the HOA for at least 4 years, Linda explained. Fake invoices, inflated contractor bills, unauthorized personal expenses. We're talking about $73,000 in missing funds. The smell of betrayal was stronger than the diesel fumes from passing trucks outside my workshop. Harold called me an hour later with even worse news. "Mike, I checked the HOA's liability insurance policy. It specifically excludes coverage for known property disputes. If you win this case, the HOA will be personally liable for all costs. The loan, the land value, legal fees, everything." The math was staggering. Individual homeowner assessments could reach $15,000 to $25,000 each if the HOA lost. 47 families facing potential financial ruin because their president decided to gamble with other people's money. "But here's what really gets me," Harold continued, his voice tight with anger. "The original developer, Patty's brother-in-law, declared bankruptcy 2 years ago. He took his profits and ran, leaving the HOA holding the bag for his fraudulent land deals. This wasn't David versus Goliath anymore. This was David versus a criminal conspiracy that had been stealing from their own community for years. The power dynamic had completely flipped. I wasn't just some guy fighting for camping rights, I was potentially the whistleblower who could expose systematic fraud and save dozens of families from financial catastrophe. Linda's final bombshell made everything clear. The board meeting recording also captured Patty saying she'd rather destroy that troublemaker than admit the HOA's mistakes. "She's planning something big, Mike, be careful." Sitting in my workshop that evening, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and wood stain, I realized this fight had evolved far beyond personal grievance. My grandfather hadn't just left me 47 acres of beautiful lake property. He'd left me the evidence to expose corruption and protect an entire community. The question was no longer whether I could win. The question was whether I had the courage to see justice through to the end. The next morning, my kitchen table looked like a war room. Harold Jenkins sat across from me, with survey maps spread between coffee cups and legal pads. Linda and Bob Martinez flanked us with their secret recordings and photographed documents. And in the corner, nursing black coffee like it was medicine, sat Sarah Chen, a legal aid attorney who'd heard about our case on local radio and offered pro bono representation. "This is bigger than a property dispute," Sarah said, her voice steady and professional. "We're looking at multiple felonies: embezzlement, conspiracy, fraudulent misrepresentation. I can file criminal referrals alongside the civil case." She laid out our options like a battlefield strategy. Nuclear option: demand immediate removal of all structures on your land. Alternative: negotiate a long-term lease with back rent payments for 15 years of unauthorized use. Harold pulled out his calculator. 15 years of exclusive waterfront access. Estimated rental value of $2,000 per month. That's $360,000 in back rent plus interest. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the tension in the room as we calculated the financial devastation. But here's another crucial knowledge nugget. Unjust enrichment doctrine: if someone profits from your property without permission, you can legally demand they return those profits even without a formal rental agreement. Takeaway: document any unauthorized use of your property, you might be entitled to compensation even years later. Sarah organized our evidence into 3 categories: property ownership proof, conspiracy documentation, and financial fraud evidence. "We need one more piece," she said. "Direct proof that Patty knew this was illegal from the beginning." That's when Linda smiled. "I've got something better than proof. I've got her admitting it on tape." She played the recording from the secret board meeting. Patty's voice filled my kitchen. "Look, we borrowed against that land because we needed the money. If this Stevens guy wants to make trouble, we'll make his life hell until he gives up." Bob Martinez had been quietly organizing a community response. 34 households have signed a petition demanding Patty's resignation. People are scared about the financial liability, but they're angrier about being lied to. Harold contributed the technical expertise. "I've marked the exact property boundaries with permanent steel posts. Every structure, every improvement, every square foot of encroachment is documented with GPS coordinates." Sarah outlined our timeline. Week 1, file formal legal notice and settlement offer. Week 2, present evidence to HOA board. Week 3, if rejected, file lawsuit and notify media. Week 4, public pressure campaign. Jim Thompson, my grandfather's old fishing buddy, brought something unexpected: connections. My grandson works at the Herald Tribune. Local paper's been investigating HOA corruption for months. They'd love this story. The settlement offer Sarah drafted was surprisingly generous. "We're asking for $150,000 for a permanent easement allowing HOA amenities to remain. That's half the back rent value and far less than relocation costs. But," Sarah added with a slight smile, "we're also demanding full public disclosure of the fraud and Patty's resignation, non-negotiable." As the afternoon wore on, my kitchen felt less like a war room and more like a community organizing center, the aroma of Linda's homemade cookies mixed with the sound of staplers binding evidence packets. Harold finished installing the final boundary markers as sunset painted the lake orange and gold. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, driving steel posts into ground that had been disputed for too long. That evening, I sat on my dock with a beer, watching the water reflect the last light of day. Tomorrow, we'd deliver our settlement offer. Patty would have 30 days to accept justice or face the consequences. The gentle lapping of waves against the shore sounded like a countdown timer. Patty's response to our settlement offer was immediate and explosive. Within hours of Sarah delivering the legal documents, she'd called another emergency HOA meeting and proposed an $8,000 special assessment per household to fund a legal war against me. "This greedy opportunist is trying to exploit a technicality to steal our homes," she shouted at the packed clubhouse. The smell of fear and desperation hung in the air like burnt coffee. "We cannot let him destroy everything we've built here." But her desperation was showing. 23 households had already signed Linda's petition demanding Patty's resignation. The community was fracturing, and she was losing control. The intimidation campaign escalated quickly. Anonymous letters appeared in my mailbox threatening legal retaliation if you don't drop this scam. My truck tires were slashed while parked outside the courthouse. City inspectors arrived at my property with increasingly ridiculous violation notices. Apparently my tent stakes were improperly installed camping infrastructure. Then came the fake social media accounts. "Mike Stevens is a divorced deadbeat trying to steal from hardworking families," appeared on every local Facebook group. "Don't trust this con artist's lies about property lines." The posts included photos of my camping setup with captions about vagrant camps threatening property values. But here's where Patty made her biggest mistake. She targeted my business. Fake one-star Google reviews flooded my woodworking company page. "Shoddy work, unreliable, try to overcharge." Anonymous complaints were filed with the Better Business Bureau and State Contractor Licensing Board. 3 more clients suddenly canceled orders after receiving anonymous tips about my legal troubles. The mini twist came when I installed security cameras around my property. What I captured on video would later become crucial evidence. Patty herself at 2 a.m. spray painting fraud across my workshop fence. While Patty raged publicly, I focused on silent preparation. Sarah Chen filed for a restraining order based on the escalating harassment. I documented every threatening letter, every act of vandalism, every attempt to destroy my livelihood. Harold's wife had finished her forensic audit of HOA finances. The embezzlement was worse than we'd thought. $73,000 stolen through fake invoices, inflated contractor bills, and unauthorized business expenses that were actually personal purchases. "She's been treating the HOA treasury like her personal piggy bank," Harold said, showing me receipts for community events that were actually Patty's family vacations. Bob Martinez had been gathering intelligence from inside the HOA board. "3 board members want to accept your settlement offer," he reported, "but Patty's threatening to sue them personally if they betray the community." The board meeting recordings Linda captured showed Patty's increasingly unhinged behavior. "I'll destroy Mike Stevens before I let him humiliate me," she'd said during one closed session. "We have lawyers, we have money, and we have the city council on our side." But that last claim proved to be another lie. Sarah discovered that Patty had been paying the HOA's legal bills from the Emergency Reserve Fund without proper board authorization. Another violation of fiduciary duty that could result in criminal charges. The pressure was getting to her. Neighbors reported seeing Patty walking the property line at odd hours, measuring and remeasuring boundaries, like she could somehow make the GPS coordinates disappear through sheer willpower. Meanwhile, I continued my camping trips, security cameras recording every peaceful moment by my grandfather's fire pit. The contrast was deliberate. Me enjoying my legal property rights versus Patty's increasingly desperate criminal behavior. The smell of wood smoke from my evening campfires drifted across the lake, a reminder that this land had been in my family for 70 years, while Patty's HOA had been trespassing for barely 15. Linda called with the final piece of intelligence we needed. The board voted in closed session to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on you. Patty's authorized up to $20,000 to find something we can use against him. $20,000 of other people's money to investigate me for camping on my own land. That's when I knew we'd pushed her past the breaking point. Patty was about to do something desperate, something that would expose her corruption to the entire community. The sound of my security system beeping as it armed each night had become oddly comforting. Whatever Patty was planning, we'd be ready. Patty's final gambit was as desperate as it was stupid. She convinced 18 remaining loyal homeowners to file a counter-lawsuit claiming I was trying to steal their homes through fraudulent legal technicalities. The irony was suffocating. The woman who'd been stealing from her own community for years was now claiming I was the thief. The countersuit demanded I pay their legal costs plus damages for emotional distress and property devaluation. They hired a high-price attorney from the city and authorized a $20,000 retainer funded by raiding the HOA's emergency reserves. But Patty's nuclear option backfired spectacularly. The lawsuit filing was public record, which meant every homeowner could now see exactly how their emergency funds were being spent. Linda Martinez organized an emergency meeting of concerned residents in the community center parking lot, away from Patty's control. "She's gambling our children's future on a lawsuit she knows she can't win," Linda announced to the crowd. The smell of exhaust fumes mixed with righteous anger as 43 homeowners gathered under streetlights to hear the truth. Harold presented the financial mathematics with devastating clarity. If we lose this lawsuit, every household faces assessments between $15,000 and $25,000. Patty's betting your home's on a lie. The mini twist came when Bob Martinez revealed Patty's most desperate move yet. She'd secretly contacted a private investigator to follow me, hoping to find evidence of illegal activity. $20,000 of HOA money spent on private detectives to stalk a man camping on his own property. The investigator quit after 2 weeks, Bob announced. His report concluded that Mike Stevens is boringly law-abiding and clearly the legitimate property owner. Even the private eye Patty hired had sided with me. Meanwhile, the criminal investigation into Patty's embezzlement was heating up. Sarah Chen had filed formal complaints with the district attorney's office, providing evidence of fraudulent invoices, unauthorized expenditures, and conspiracy to conceal property fraud. The pressure was destroying Patty's carefully constructed facade. Neighbors reported seeing her pacing her property line at 3 a.m., shouting at invisible enemies. Her white BMW showed up at City Hall daily as she desperately tried to find officials who'd help her fight what everyone now knew was a losing battle. The fake social media campaign intensified, but it was backfiring. My security cameras had captured footage of Patty vandalizing my property, which Sarah posted online with the caption, "This is your HOA president at 2 a.m., spray painting fraud on the property she's been stealing from for 15 years. The video went viral locally. The irony was too perfect. The real fraud caught on camera while calling her victim a fraud. 3 more board members resigned rather than face potential criminal liability. The HOA was imploding from within as residents chose between supporting obvious corruption or accepting the financial consequences of Patty's crimes. Real estate agents started warning potential buyers about the ongoing legal issues at Lakeside Estates. Property values began dropping as the scandal spread beyond our local community. The smell of panic was stronger than the diesel fumes from moving trucks as 2 families decided to cut their losses and relocate. Sarah discovered Patty's most reckless move. She'd been paying the high-priced attorney with money earmarked for essential HOA services. The community's snow removal, landscaping, and maintenance funds had been diverted to finance her personal legal war against me. "She's literally stealing from every resident to fund her vendetta," Sarah explained during our final strategy meeting. "This isn't just embezzlement anymore. It's wholesale fraud affecting the entire community." The breaking point came when Linda intercepted a panicked phone call between Patty and her brother-in-law, the bankrupt developer. "You promised this would never come out," Patty screamed. "Now I'm facing criminal charges because you cut corners on the land survey." The family conspiracy was crumbling as co-conspirators turned on each other. That evening, the district attorney's office called Sarah with news I'd been hoping for. They were ready to file criminal charges against Patty for embezzlement, conspiracy, and fraudulent misrepresentation. A grand jury would convene within 2 weeks. Sitting on my dock that night, watching moonlight dance across water my grandfather had fished for 70 years, I could smell victory in the cool lake breeze. Tomorrow, we'd attend a monthly city council meeting where this whole nightmare would finally end. Patty had gambled everything on destroying me. Instead, she'd destroyed herself. The monthly city council meeting had never seen a crowd like this, standing room only in chambers built for 50, with over 100 residents packed inside. Local TV news crews positioned cameras while reporters whispered into microphones. The smell of nervous energy mixed with the institutional odor of government building disinfectant. I sat quietly in the back row with Sarah Chen, Harold Jenkins, and my growing support team. Patty commanded the front rows with her dwindling army of 18 loyal supporters, their faces grim with the knowledge that their financial futures hung in the balance. Mayor Davidson called for order and announced the special agenda item: Property Dispute Resolution, Lakeside Estates Development. His voice carried the weight of someone who knew this meeting would be remembered for years. Patty approached the podium first, her designer clothes unable to hide the desperation in her eyes. "Honorable council members," she began, her voice cracking slightly, "our peaceful community is under attack by an outsider using legal technicalities to steal our homes." She clicked through a slideshow of emotional manipulation, photos of children playing on their beach, elderly residents enjoying their gazebo, families gathered at their boat launch. Tears streamed down her face as she painted me as a heartless predator destroying the American dream. This man wants to charge us rent for amenities we've maintained and improved for 15 years. He's exploiting a paperwork error to rob hard-working families of their life savings. The crowd murmured sympathetically until Mayor Davidson called me forward. "Council members," I said, placing Harold's professional survey on the presentation table, "I'm not here to steal anyone's home. I'm here to reclaim property that legally belongs to my family and has for 70 years. Sarah Chen methodically presented our evidence: historical surveys, GPS coordinates, legal precedents. Harold explained the technical details with professional authority that cut through Patty's emotional appeals. Then came the first bombshell. "Council members, we've discovered that Ms. Whitmore has embezzled $73,000 from the HOA treasury over 4 years, Sarah announced. The room erupted as she displayed bank records, fake invoices, and unauthorized expenditures. Patty jumped up, her composed facade cracking. "Those allegations are completely fabricated. This is a coordinated attack." "These are your signatures, Ms. Whitmore," Sarah interrupted, holding up photocopied checks. "Your handwriting on fake invoices, your authorization codes on personal expenses charged to HOA accounts." The second bombshell hit harder. Linda Martinez approached the microphone as a surprise witness. "I've been recording HOA board meetings for 8 months, she announced, including Miss Whitmore's admission that she knew about the property line issues since 2019, but voted to cover them up. Linda's clear voice filled the chamber as she read from official meeting minutes. "Motion to suppress survey results and manage situation quietly. Voted approved 4-1, with Whitmore stating, cheaper to fight than relocate amenities." The crowd's murmur turned to angry buzzing. Patty's face went white as the magnitude of her exposure became clear. Then I delivered the mic drop moment. "Council members, I never wanted anyone's homes. 3 months ago, I offered a generous settlement, $150,000 for permanent easement rights, allowing all HOA amenities to remain exactly where they are. Ms. Whitmore rejected that offer and chose to wage a campaign of harassment, vandalism, and embezzlement instead. The silence was deafening. All I ever wanted was to camp peacefully at my grandfather's lake, the same lake where he taught me to fish, where he shared stories of serving this country in World War II, where my family has gathered for 70 years. Ms. Whitmore turned that simple wish into a community crisis, through her own criminal choices. That's when the district attorney's investigator stood up in the gallery. "Patricia Whitmore, you're under arrest for embezzlement, conspiracy to commit fraud, and criminal misappropriation of funds." The handcuffs clicked shut as cameras captured every moment. Patty's supporters watched in stunned silence as their leader was read her rights and led away in front of the entire community. Harold Jenkins rose from his seat. "On behalf of the remaining HOA board members, we formally accept Mr. Stevens' original settlement offer and apologize to him and this community for the actions of our former president." The crowd erupted in applause that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Mayor Davidson banged his gavel with a smile. Motion carried by acclamation. Case closed. Walking out of those chambers, shaking hands with neighbors who'd become friends through this ordeal, I could hear my grandfather's voice on the evening breeze. "Sometimes doing right ain't easy, but it's always worth it." 6 months later, I'm sitting around my grandfather's stone fire pit, but I'm not alone anymore. Harold Jenkins is teaching his grandson how to tie fishing knots, while Linda Martinez flips burgers on the new community grill. The smell of wood smoke and barbecue sauce mixes with the sound of children's laughter echoing across the lake. Patty pled guilty to all charges and received 18 months probation plus full restitution. The new HOA board, led by Linda as president, implemented transparent financial reporting and term limits, Property values not only recovered but increased as the community gained a reputation for honest governance. The $150,000 settlement transformed both my life and the community. I expanded my woodworking business and created the Robert Stevens Memorial Scholarship for veterans' children pursuing trade skills. Grandpa would have loved knowing his legacy was helping young people learn to work with their hands. The lake property became something even more special than family land. It became community land. We established an annual Lake Day festival that draws families from 3 counties. Kids learn to fish from Harold at the rebuilt dock. Veterans share stories around the evening campfire. Local artisans sell their crafts under the big oak trees that still hold those 1,920 survey markers. Sarah Chen opened her own practice specializing in HOA abuse cases. She's helped 12 other families facing similar property disputes, using our case as a template for peaceful resolution. The key, she always tells clients, is documentation, patience, and community support. The conservation initiative turned out to be my proudest achievement. 20 acres of pristine lakefront now sit under permanent conservation easement with the State Parks Department. School groups visit monthly to learn about wetland ecology and local history. The nature trails Harold helped design are wheelchair accessible, ensuring everyone can enjoy what my grandfather preserved. Bob Martinez started a neighborhood watch program focused on community building rather than surveillance. Linda's coffee meetings became a weekly tradition where residents actually talked to each other instead of just complaining through official channels. The toxic culture Patty created has been replaced by something resembling actual neighborliness. The media attention brought unexpected opportunities. I've spoken at 3 property law conferences about conflict resolution and spoke to a documentary crew about HOA reform. The story became a case study at the State University's Public Administration program, teaching future city planners about the importance of proper land surveys. My personal life improved in ways I never expected. The confidence gained from standing up to institutional bullying attracted positive attention from people who valued integrity over convenience. I'm dating a wonderful woman named Kate who heard the story and reached out to share her own experiences with community organizing. The camping trips continue, but they're richer now. Former enemies have become friends who join me for weekend retreats. We cook fish caught from Harold's restocked lake, tell stories under stars unmarred by light pollution, and sleep peacefully on land that's finally being used as it was meant to be, bringing people together rather than driving them apart. 3 practical takeaways saved my case and could save yours. First, survey your property boundaries every 10 to 15 years to prevent disputes before they start. Second, demand annual independent audits and transparent financial reporting from any HOA or community organization. Third, keep all property documents in both fireproof safes and digital backups. You never know when century-old paperwork might save your legacy. Jim Thompson still visits to share memories of fishing with my grandfather. Your grandpa always said the lake belonged to anyone willing to respect it, he told me last weekend. Looks like you found a way to honor that. The gentle sound of water lapping against the shore has returned to its peaceful rhythm, no longer interrupted by legal battles or community conflict. Children catch their first fish from the same dock where I learned 70 years of family tradition. The stone fire pit continues hosting stories that connect generations. Sometimes I sit here at sunset, watching families enjoy amenities that almost got torn down by one person's greed and pride. The $150,000 bought more than property rights. It bought community healing and a sustainable future for this special place. The lake reflects not just trees and sky now, but the faces of neighbors who chose cooperation over conflict, truth over convenience, and justice over expediency. If you've survived your own HOA nightmare, drop a comment and share your story. I read every single one, and your experiences help others facing similar battles. And if this story resonated with you, hit that subscribe button, because next week I'm telling you about the time my neighbor tried to claim my driveway and ended up owing me $50,000. Until then, keep fighting the good fight. Sometimes standing up for what's right takes everything you've got, but the view from the other side makes every moment worth it.